Iran spent decades building the perfect threat, a narrow strip of water, 21 miles wide at its tightest point, and through that gap every single day, roughly 25% of the world's seaborne oil and 20% of its liquefied natural gas flowed to markets across the planet. Saudi Arabia's oil, Qatar's gas, the UAE's exports, all of it funneled through one place, the Strait of Hormuz. And for 4 decades, Iran stood at the edge of that funnel and pointed a gun at the entire global economy. Close this, they said. Try us. Nobody ever did, until now. Because something happened in the waters of the Persian Gulf in 2026 that most people still don't fully understand. Not because it wasn't reported, it was, but because the headlines kept showing you the explosions, the drone footage, the diplomatic statements. And none of that tells you about the weapon underneath it all. The system that didn't fire a single dramatic shot. The technology that didn't make a single headline, but that quietly, surgically, completely dismantled Iran's entire 40-year strategy in ways that Iranian commanders are only now beginning to comprehend the full depth of. That is what this video is about, not the missiles you saw, the weapon you didn't. To understand what the US Navy actually deployed in those waters, you first have to understand what Iran was counting on. And what Iran was counting on was chaos, not a clean, conventional war where the bigger navy wins. Iran knows it can't win that fight. Iran's strategy was always built around something different, something far more dangerous. The idea that even if you can't defeat a superior force in open water, you can make the cost of fighting you so high, so unpredictable, so exhausting, that the other side eventually decides the strait isn't worth it. Think about what that strategy actually looks like in practice. You flood the water with small, fast attack boats, hundreds of them, each one cheap, each one expendable, each one capable of launching rockets or torpedoes or simply ramming into the side of a tanker. You layer that with drone swarms launched from the coastline. Not one drone, not 10 drones, swarms of 50, 80, 100 low-cost one-way attack drones, each one costing around $20,000, swarming a target at the same time from multiple directions simultaneously. You add sea mines to the northern approaches of the strait, forcing shipping to reroute into more congested, more dangerous water. And you park anti-ship cruise missile batteries in hardened positions along the Iranian coastline, each one capable of hitting a warship from over 100 kilometers away. You build a wall of chaos, and then you dare the other side to walk through it. That was the plan. That was what Iran activated on February 28, 2026, the moment American and Israeli strikes began hitting Iranian military and government sites. The IRGC Navy started mining the northern corridor of the Strait of Hormuz. Fast attack boats began harassing and boarding commercial vessels. Drones started launching from Iranian coastal positions. Shipping traffic through one of the world's most vital corridors collapsed by over 90%. The chaos wall went up exactly as designed. And then the US Navy introduced the weapon Iran had no answer for. Not a bigger gun, not more soldiers, a system. The Aegis Combat System. And if you've heard that name before and thought it was just another piece of military hardware, you have completely missed what it actually is. Because the Aegis is not a weapon in the way most people think of weapons. It is a brain, a networked, interconnected, constantly calculating brain shared across every single ship in a battle group simultaneously. Here is what that means in the specific context of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's chaos strategy works against isolated targets. One destroyer sailing alone through the northern corridor under attack from 100 drones coming from 6 different directions. From coastal batteries, from fast attack boats in the water below, from the air above, that destroyer is overwhelmed. It cannot process all of that at once. It runs out of interceptors. Something gets through. The chaos worked. Now put that same destroyer inside an Aegis networked fleet. The moment any sensor on any ship in the formation detects an inbound drone, that detection is not just processed locally, it is transmitted across the entire network in real time, shared with every other ship, every aircraft, every platform in the formation simultaneously. The SPY-1D phased array radar at the core of the system can track over 100 targets simultaneously within a range exceeding 450 kilometers. Not one ship tracking 100 targets. Every ship contributing to one shared picture of everything happening in that entire battle space at once. When Iran's IRGC fired missiles and launched drones and sent fast attack boats at USS Truxtun and USS Mason during Operation Project Freedom on May 4, 2026, what they encountered was not 2 destroyers. They encountered an integrated organism. U.S. Central Command confirmed afterward that no American assets were struck. Truxtun and Mason fought their way through a sustained barrage described by defense officials as a coordinated multi-vector assault, ballistic missiles, one-way attack drones, small boat swarms, all at once, and emerged on the other side of the strait without a scratch. Multiple Iranian vessels were destroyed. The chaos wall, the strategy Iran spent decades building, ran directly into a system designed specifically to absorb and defeat it. Now that alone is remarkable, but that is still not the secret weapon. Because what the Aegis network did above the surface is only half the story, and the half that matters most to Iran's military planners is the part happening beneath it. Somewhere in the Persian Gulf, right now, American attack submarines are holding position, silently, without broadcasting their location, without surfacing, without doing anything visible at all. And that invisibility is precisely the weapon. Iran's sonar systems have spent years under sanctions, limited access to modern detection technology, constrained investment. The ability to reliably detect and track a modern American nuclear-powered attack submarine in those waters is simply beyond what Iran's current naval capability can deliver. And that gap between what they suspect is down there and what they can actually confirm is where the real psychological pressure lives. Picture the Iranian commander of a fast attack boat flotilla receiving orders to push toward the blockade enforcement zone. He knows the American surface ships are there. He can see them on his radar. He knows their firepower, but he also knows something is probably underneath those waters, something he cannot see, something that can see him, something that can end his entire flotilla before the order to fire even reaches his hand. And he cannot know for certain where it is, or how many there are, or what orders they're operating under. He can't know if the moment he pushes forward is the moment that decision is made for him, from 60 meters below the surface, with no warning at all. That uncertainty doesn't need to fire a torpedo to do damage. It has already done its work. The hesitation it creates, the extra calculation it forces into every single decision Iran's naval commanders have to make, that is the weapon. It is the difference between an opponent who knows exactly what they're facing and an opponent who is fighting with one eye permanently closed, permanently afraid of what they can't see. And here is the strategic irony that Iranian military planners probably understand better than anyone is willing to say publicly. Their own minds helped create this situation. When the IRGC mined the northern approaches of the strait to make life difficult for American warships, they forced the majority of commercial shipping traffic to detour south toward the Omani side of the channel. And the southern corridor, further from Iranian coastal batteries, further from Iranian patrol boat bases, with more open water and more maneuvering room, happens to be exactly the corridor where American surface ships and their submarine escorts can operate with maximum effectiveness and minimum exposure to Iranian asymmetric threats. Iran built the chaos wall in the north, and in doing so, accidentally handed the United States the ideal operating environment in the south. Every ship that rerouted away from the Iranian-controlled northern lane rerouted directly into American naval protection. The wall became a funnel pointing toward exactly the wrong place. Now let's talk about what this weapon is actually doing to the regime itself, because the Aegis system and the submarine presence are the instruments. But the target isn't Iranian ships. The real target is something far more fundamental to the regime's survival. By April 13th, 2026, after the Islamabad peace talks collapsed over the central question of Iran's nuclear program, the United States did something that no amount of airstrikes could accomplish. It announced a naval blockade, not of the Strait of Hormuz, of Iran's ports specifically. Every other nation, every other ship, every other trading partner could sail freely. Only vessels tied to Iranian ports faced interdiction. Within the first day alone, USS Spruance was turning back ships attempting to hug Iran's southern coastline to avoid interception. Within the first week, over 21 vessels had been forced to reverse course. Within the first 3 weeks, by the Department of Defense's own estimate, Iran had lost $4.8 billion in oil revenue. The Foundation for Defense of Democracies estimated the combined daily economic damage running at approximately $435 million per day, when you account for halted crude exports, halted petrochemical exports, and the roughly 90% collapse in other maritime exports. Oxford Economics assessed the blockade could cut 70% of Iran's total export income. The numbers, whatever the precise final figure, all point in the same direction, vast and devastating. And you have to understand what that money actually is inside the Iranian system. It is not just government revenue in the abstract sense. that any government needs tax income to operate. In Iran specifically, oil revenue is the glue holding the entire power structure together. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the military and economic organization that actually enforces the regime's authority over its own population, does not operate on ideology alone. It operates on salaries, on weapons funding, on the business empires and privileges that flow from a government that can afford to keep its enforcers loyal. Take away the oil revenue and you are not just hitting the budget, you are dissolving the financial foundation of the loyalty that keeps the regime safe from the tens of millions of Iranians who have been living under crushing inflation, medicine shortages, and economic collapse for years before a single American bomb fell. That is why the US Navy's secret weapon isn't the Aegis radar. It isn't the submarine presence. It isn't even the blockade itself as a military operation. The secret weapon is the specific, surgical, almost clinical way all of these pieces were assembled to target the one thing the regime absolutely cannot survive without. The money that buys its own protection, that is the target. Everything else is the delivery mechanism. And if you think that sounds like an overstatement, look at what Iranian state media has been doing since the blockade began. Look at the animated propaganda videos showing American aircraft carriers being sunk by Iranian missiles. Look at the IRGC spokesperson declaring that they would turn the Persian Gulf into the largest blue graveyard of American Marines. Look at the parliamentary speaker's claims. And ask yourself a simple question. Why does a military force that is genuinely confident in its position need to release animated cartoons to reassure anyone? Military forces with real leverage demonstrate it. They don't animate it. The louder and more theatrical the statements coming out of Tehran have become, the more clearly they reveal what is actually happening behind those statements. An organization that knows its financial foundation is being dismantled from the outside is trying desperately to project the image of strength to the audience that matters most. Not Washington, not the international community, the Iranian people themselves, people who have watched their savings evaporate, their medicine disappear, their economy unravel. People who need to believe the regime is still strong, still winning, still capable of protecting them. Because if they stop believing that, the calculation that keeps 40 million ordinary Iranians from acting on decades of accumulated anger starts to shift. Now here is where this gets genuinely complicated, and anyone who tells you there are easy answers here is not being straight with you. If you think Iran had no right to respond the way it did, ask yourself this. When a country watches airstrikes hit its military sites, watches its senior leadership assassinated, watches its economy strangled by blockade, what exactly are the options available to it? The chaos strategy, the mine laying, the drone swarms, these were not acts of pure aggression against the world. They were the defensive moves of a state that believed it was fighting for its own survival. You can disagree with the regime that runs Iran. You can disagree with everything it stands for. But the strategic logic of why it tried to close the strait was not irrational. It was a regime reaching for the only lever it believed it had left. But if you think the United States had no right to enforce this blockade, answer this question. A government with a documented 4-decade history of funding proxy militias across 4 countries, of actively pursuing a nuclear weapons capability through years of deception, of suppressing its own population with lethal force the moment that population protested in the streets, that government was getting close to acquiring the most dangerous weapons on the planet. The blockade is not a comfortable tool. Economic pressure at this scale causes real suffering, not to IRGC commanders who will eat regardless, but to ordinary Iranian families who had no say in any of the decisions that brought this crisis to their doorstep. None of that is comfortable to sit with. But the alternative, allowing a nuclear program to proceed under the cover of a conflict that everyone is exhausted by, carries a different kind of cost, one that doesn't get measured in months. It gets measured in decades. That tension is real. It has no clean resolution. Both things are simultaneously true. And if you think the US is in the right here and that Iran brought this on itself, subscribe right now, because the next videos on this channel are going to go deep into exactly how this pressure campaign forces the regime's hand and what happens to the Middle East if it works. And if you think Iran is being strangled unjustly by a global superpower that picked this fight, subscribe anyway, because understanding the full picture of how this ends requires seeing every side of it clearly. This channel does not give you comfortable answers, it gives you real ones. Now let's talk about where this actually goes from here, because the blockade, as effective as it has been, is not a permanent end state. It is pressure, and pressure without a specific destination is just pain. What matters is what happens next, and there are 3 doors in front of the Iranian leadership right now, and none of them are good. Behind the first door is conventional military response, sending the IRGC's remaining fast attack boat capability directly into confrontation with the blockade fleet. Everything we have discussed about what the Aegis network does to that kind of attack tells you how that ends. It ends badly for Iran. And yet, hardline factions within the IRGC face enormous internal pressure to demonstrate they can still fight, that the regime is not simply absorbing punishment without answering it. Institutions under this kind of existential financial pressure sometimes make decisions that make no military sense because the alternative, appearing weak in front of their own hardliners, feels more dangerous than a military confrontation that logic says they will lose. Behind the second door is drone and missile escalation. Iran still has stockpiles. It still has launch infrastructure, though US strikes have degraded significant portions of it. The question is whether the remaining capability can generate enough volume to saturate the networked Aegis defenses in the blockade zone. Every indication from the engagements during Operation Project Freedom is that the answer, at current Iranian inventory levels, is no. But every attempt Iran makes in that direction also tells American commanders exactly what is left and where it is, which is its own kind of intelligence operation in reverse. Behind the third door is the most dangerous option, striking the ports and energy infrastructure of neighboring Gulf states. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, all of them host American military assets used directly in this operation. An Iranian strike on those ports would almost certainly trigger a regional escalation that would pull multiple additional military powers into direct conflict with Iran simultaneously. And even the hardest of the IRGC's hardliners understands on some level that this is the door that doesn't lead to survival. It leads to something much worse. What that means, underneath all the noise and all the rhetoric and all the animated propaganda videos, is that Iran is being walked toward a negotiating table it doesn't want to sit at. Not because anyone is going to force it to sit there at gunpoint, but because the financial infrastructure of the regime itself is being slowly, precisely suffocated. The system that keeps the regime safe from its own people runs on oil money, and the US Navy's secret weapon, that quiet, networked, surgically precise combination of Aegis-linked surface ships, unseen submarines, and a blockade calibrated specifically to leave everyone else untouched, is draining that system one day at a time. The IRGC spokesperson said they would make the Persian Gulf a graveyard for American Marines. What actually happened on May 4th, 2026, when USS Truxtun and USS Mason ran the Iranian gauntlet under sustained missile, drone, and small boat attack, was something very different. Both ships made it through. No American assets were struck. Multiple Iranian vessels were destroyed. The graveyard the IRGC promised turned out to be a passage, and the Aegis network held the door open. This is what the US Navy's secret weapon actually is. Not a single piece of technology, not a single dramatic engagement. A system. A philosophy of warfare built around shared awareness, networked lethality, and the kind of invisible underwater presence that doesn't need to fire to change every decision the enemy makes. A system assembled and positioned specifically to target the money that holds a regime together, rather than the military hardware that merely defends it. The strait is still open, oil still flows to the world, every country except one sails through freely, and somewhere beneath those waters, silent and completely invisible, the real weapon holds its position and waits. Wars are rarely won by the loudest explosion. They are won by whoever controls what the other side cannot survive without. And right now, in the waters between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, that control has changed hands. Quietly, precisely, completely. And the regime that spent 40 years pointing a gun at the global economy is only now beginning to understand that someone changed who was holding it.